Revenant Reborn is the most exciting movement legend with the deepest skill expression since Pathfinder. Yes, I said it. There's so much more depth in his kit than you would expect at first glance. The problem is that this leads to so many misunderstandings. Many of the tips and tricks I've seen so far are either based on incorrect assumptions or are actually wrong. Let me tell you how to use his new capabilities to their fullest potential and what insane tricks we have already discovered. This video is split into chapters. I will talk about the very important fundamentals of the tactical first, then advanced uses of the tactical, how to combine it with the passive, advanced uses of the passive, and some fun stuff with the ultimate. But first I want to tell you a little story. I have genuinely been using ExpressVPN on a near daily basis for Apex. They sponsored this video, but the use case that I'm about to tell you isn't anywhere in their talking points they sent me. My internet provider has routing issues. Routing is how they send your data around different data centers to the final destination. Most importantly, I have issues with connecting to EA servers. Sometimes an Apex update will just not start. Or I can't get into the game, getting the dreaded unable to connect to EA servers error. I start up ExpressVPN and suddenly it works. In even more extreme cases, my entire internet will stop working. And sometimes ExpressVPN fixes it. Apparently ExpressVPN uses different routing that bypasses the specific issue my ISP is somehow causing. This sounds like some completely exaggerated talking point, but has literally saved me from not being able to finish videos on time. If you have problems with connecting to Apex or other services, ExpressVPN could be the solution. On top of that come all the other benefits like accessing streaming content from other countries, cheaper prices by changing your location, and hiding what you're doing from certain advertisers. And they have a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk. See if it fixes your issues and go watch some stuff on streaming you can't watch otherwise. Find out how you can get 3 months for free by clicking the link in the description or pinned comment. Let's start with Revenant's new tactical Shadow Pounce. At its core, this ability seems pretty simple. Hit your tactical for a small pounce, hold it for a bigger pounce. But there is a lot more depth than that. When you just hit your tactical, there is a small delay of 0.9 seconds before you pounce. So I tested what happens when you hold your tactical for the same 0.9 seconds. The range is the exact same. So if you just want a small hop, do what feels more comfortable to you. There's no loss, but also no benefit of holding your tactical very briefly over just hitting it. The longest you can hold it to keep gaining distance is 2.2 seconds, which ends with the first frame of the red flash on your hands. So learn to time it with that for the shortest hold time that gives you the maximum range. You can air strafe out of his tactical, even on controller. You're not fully stuck in the direction where you first pointed. On mouse and keyboard this means you can also Tap-Strafe out of it, but I'll get to that later. Another basic thing I want you to notice is that there is a slight push upwards. In most cases you don't go where you point, but slightly above that. That's a 35-degree angle correction. Keep that in mind for the following explanations. Where you want to look when you pounce strongly depends on whether you want to optimize for distance, speed, or obstacles and terrain around you. If you want to optimize for distance, the theoretical perfect viewing direction is straight ahead, or a 0-degree pitch angle. With Revenant, straight ahead is looking half a head height above a dummy. So go around the fire range, look up and down, and then try to find straight ahead again. Test on the next dummy if you are correct, and get used to what looking straight ahead feels like. I'm calling straight ahead a neutral pounce. Depending on the scenario, you have some leeway up and down though. On flat ground, there's basically no difference whether you aim slightly above or below neutral. Up to 5 degrees doesn't really matter. You will land and skid on the ground or slide to the same end position. Above 5 degrees, you will lose momentum when landing, cause you land from higher up. Below 5 degrees down will start to lose distance, so try to look straight ahead. If you don't care about landing with momentum or in a slide and just want the maximum pounce distance to clear a gap for example, you should never ever look below neutral. Just 1 degree down will already steal distance. You can look up though. Up to 15 degrees will give you the exact same pounce distance that looking straight ahead will give you. Looking up more than 15 degrees will remove velocity and therefore distance again. By the way, the maximum range is 45 meters, which is exactly the distance between these two platforms in the fire range. Weird coincidence. But if you are going to drop a bit after you pounce, then looking up is discouraged again, cause the higher arc from looking up also results in a shorter arc down at the ground. If you want a general rule of thumb to optimize for distance, no matter the situation, it would be look straight ahead and rather a bit up than down. A rule of thumb to get the best Apex movement videos is to subscribe to this channel. If you want to optimize for speed, you should look down. For a fully charged pounce, the initial velocity is always the same, no matter how much you look down, 1150. But the further you look down, the more of that velocity gets converted into horizontal speed. So if your primary concern is not to maximize distance, but to get to your target that's a bit closer, as quick as possible, then look down. It's always faster than a neutral pounce, but only up to a point. Looking down more than 20 degrees at the ground does not give you any benefit. The trick that's already floating around of looking straight down achieves the exact same results as looking 20 degrees down. It just looks faster cause you're planting your face into the fast moving ground. I myself did a lot of testing before EladNLG dug up the actual code for Revenant's tactical. In there it clearly shows that the 35-degree upward angle correction stays the same while looking down, but at 20 degrees down your pounce direction gets fixed to 15 degrees. And no matter how much more you look down, you will always pounce the same 15 degrees upwards. So the rule of thumb to optimize for speed on the ground is look down more than 20 degrees. Do 45 just to be safe, then hold crouch and slide into those enemy DMs. If you want to optimize for the terrain and obstacles around you, the rules change a bit. Let's split this into looking down and looking up. Of course you should generally look up to go over obstacles, but because of the 35-degree upwards angle correction, you can aim below the edge you want to go over in a lot of cases. This is important because you want to stay as low as possible, for multiple reasons. First, the distance reason I mentioned. Landing from higher up takes away momentum and maybe even your ability to slide. The lower you cross an obstacle, the longer you're hidden from enemies around you. People have gotten really good at tracking airborne targets in Apex. You don't want to be that airborne target miles above cover. If you get really precise, then you can slide off of obstacles. This will let you pull out your gun earlier and give you the ability to jump and tap-strafe off the obstacle. And then there is the velocity loss. If you look above 15 degrees, you will start to lose velocity. From 15 degrees to 80 degrees, the velocity of a fully charged pounce skates all the way back down from 1150 to 700. Meaning the higher up you look, the slower you will be. The angle correction also gets reduced. From 15 degrees to 80 degrees, the angle correction goes from 35 degrees down to 0. Meaning the higher up you look, the more you will actually go in the direction where you pointed. The loss of velocity and angle correction are in fact so drastic that the highest vertical distance you can achieve with a pounce is when looking just 15 degrees up. You go 30% higher by doing the 15-degree pounce compared to looking straight up. This means there will be situations where being further away and looking further down will let you reach high ground that you cannot reach when you are too close or look too far up. Shadow Pounce is fundamentally coded to be a horizontal ability, not a vertical one. The rule of thumb when trying to get over obstacles is to pounce from further away and to look further down than you think. But there are also scenarios where you should look further down than neutral around obstacles and terrain. We can't just use the 20-degree down look to optimize for speed, but as I said, also remove 20 degrees of the upward angle correction. So use this from flat ground into a slope, in confined spaces, through doors, or whenever you want to stay low in cover. The second interesting part is when you don't look at ground. For Revenant's tactical, Apex checks if you look at ground that's closer than 200 units to you. That's about this height. If the game says, nope, you're not looking at ground right now, you unlock what's underneath you. The 15-degree angle fix I mentioned is gone, and you can pounce down now. No velocity restriction is in place. You will always get 1150 for a fully charged pounce. And the 35-degree angle correction also behaves differently. all the way to looking 75 degrees down, it's a fixed 35 degrees. So even if you aim down all the way like this, you will still get thrown 35 degrees further up than where you aimed. But as soon as you aim down just a smidge more than 75 degrees, the angle correction instantly drops to 0 and you go exactly where you are pointing. There's no gradual fall off like when looking up. It's either a full 35 degree angle correction, or as soon as you cross the threshold, none at all. And while this technically applies as soon as you don't look at ground, standing on ground will still mess with your pounce direction, either by redirecting your pounce way more forward, or straight up cancelling it altogether. Standing on ground while not looking at ground feels very clunky when you pounce. So I would advise you to always step or jump off and then release your tactical. The best use case I found for this is to pounce into a slope, while still keeping your ability to slide and keep all your momentum, cause you stay so low to the ground. But this also lets you reliably pounce straight to the ground to prevent getting lasered out of the air when dropping from high ground. Or let you Goomba stomp on someone with a PK. Or quickly get down into cover if you somehow ended up too high in the air. So the rule of thumb when trying to pounce downward is jump off. And be aware that looking up to 75 degrees down still applies the full 35 degree angle correction to you. To now summarize what is happening in the code of the tactical based on where you look. 0 to 15 degrees, full 35 degree upward angle correction, full 1150 velocity. 15 to 80 degrees, gradual loss of angle correction down to 0 and velocity down to 700. 80 to 90 degrees, 0 angle correction, lowest possible velocity of 700. When looking down at ground, 0 to negative 20 degrees, full 35 degree angle correction, full 1150 velocity. Negative 20 to negative 90 degrees, pounce direction gets fixed at positive 15 degrees, full 1150 velocity. While not looking at ground, 0 to negative 75 degrees, full 35 degree angle correction, full 1150 velocity. Negative 75 to negative 90 degrees, instant loss of angle correction, still full velocity of 1150. Over time, you will of course develop a feeling for how these theoretical values and the rules of thumb for speed, distance and obstacles I gave you actually apply to your gameplay, and how you have to modify and combine what I told you based on the terrain and gameplay situations. I just wanted to present what's fundamentally happening to prevent misconceptions and give you a head start on your Revenant journey. Now that you know how to get the most out of the basic use of the tactical, here are some advanced uses. Ledges and animation cancelling. Charging your tactical and keeping it charged works through a lot of movement, like sliding, b-hopping and mantling. Up to a certain height, you can climb while you keep holding his tactical. That height is quite a bit higher than Revenant himself. It's not just small ledges. But in a recent patch, Respawn messed up the mantle interaction. If you have a fully charged pounce, it won't work at all. And even with a barely charged up pounce, it's very inconsistent. And interacting with a zipline also activates it. Respawn has confirmed that this was an accident and will be fixed. But we have no communication yet if they even want to keep the ability to mantle while holding your pounce. Or if they want to make it so that mantling just cancels your pounce like it does with other tacticals. We only know that auto-triggering and wasting your pounce with a mantle is a bug. They also confirmed that the animation cancel will get fixed. Super gliding or sliding off an edge currently lets you cancel the pounce animation, letting you pull out your weapon earlier. I believe the animation cancel should stay, and the hold pounce during mantle should also stay, since that's how other movement abilities like a phase shift or horizon lift works. But since Respawn seems very firm in their decision to at least remove the animation cancel, I won't bother explaining it in detail. Another obstacle interaction that should definitely stay is that if you stand in front of an obstacle that you can look over, you will even be pulled over it with a pounce without mantling it. This is great to stay in cover for as long as possible and then surprise your enemies. You only need to be able to look over it when standing. You can then crouch and will still be pulled over. And it doesn't just work while standing or crouching, but you can prime your tactical, jump off an object and pounce forward as long as you can still look over it. It sometimes works with objects that are a bit higher, but there's also the risk of getting yeeted straight up into the air. Funny enough, that redirect is higher than pouncing straight upwards. Another great trick with the tactical is the ability to Tap-Strafe out of it. You cannot just Tap-Strafe out of the speed you gain from the tactical, but you can Tap-Strafe instantly out of the tactical itself. In principle, it's similar to the Tap-Strafe of the jump pad that doesn't use a double jump. So I highly advise you practice that first. Then you want to hold your tactical, jump, release your tactical, and then scroll your forward inputs. It does not work if you jump after releasing your tactical. You have to jump first. If you get really good with the timing, you can add a bigger delay between releasing your tactical and the forward inputs, which lets you pounce out from underneath an overhang before turning into the other direction. If you are on controller, you can at least still airstrafe out of his tactical. And if you are on controller, start thinking of the pounce itself as a sort of Tap-Strafe. Don't limit yourself to just using it for a push forward, but realize that it's a direction change tool as well. And on mouse and keyboard, it's of course an addition to the regular Tap-Strafe. One use case I wanted to particularly highlight is the ability to Tap-Strafe off a jump pad, Tap-Strafe with the double jump, and then use Rev's tactical for a sort of triple Tap-Strafe. You can use the pounce to avoid fall stop. Either start holding as soon as you know that you will drop, or learn the timing of clicking at 0.9 seconds above the ground for a perfect cancel. The pounce can be combined with certain other velocity, like from the targets in the fire range. Here the velocity spikes at 1600. But the same will be true for the gondolas in World's Edge, which are already a lot of fun with the jump pad. And Chaos Cobra figured out that it enhances the updraft of Broken Moon if you release the tactical together with getting forced up, yeeting you way higher than it's supposed to. But so far, these are the only interactions where the boost itself is actually enhanced. Combining the pounce with a jump pad, nade boost or super glide for example, don't stack. It's one speed boost, then the other, not a combination of both boosts into one singular bigger boost. You can do a nade boost or super glide before the pounce, but the pounce itself will not be affected by it whatsoever. It will always cap out at 1150. I wouldn't be surprised if we find more ways to break that limit, like with gravity cannons or a tick perfect nade boost together with a pounce. But for most cases, you cannot enhance the pounce with other speed boosts. The only weird interaction I found between the pounce and other legend abilities is that you can pounce down in a horizon lift. Apparently the pounce force takes priority over the lift force. A grapple for example won't do that. Other than that, everything is as expected. Use it to escape traps, Pathy can still grapple you, Ash Snare will still trap you, and on and on. Everything works like with other movement abilities. Two little quirks I wanted to point out. Bunny hopping perfectly after a pounce will keep you in the pounce animation. So if you haven't done a version with an animation cancel, try to be a bit sloppy when landing in your first slide. And don't do it perfectly, else you won't get your gun out for a lot longer than you'd ideally like to. You can redirect your pounce partially if you do it against a wall with a lip over your head. I don't know how that would ever be useful though, I just wanted to have mentioned it. And there is a timer between pouncing and being able to use your climb passive. So no matter from how far away, at which angle or height you approach the wall, you will only be able to climb 0.75 seconds after you pounced. For a fully charged pounce, that's around 20 meters away from a wall. If you just want to casually pounce into climb on a big wall, this doesn't really affect you. But if you want to be more precise and use the tactical to carry a lot of momentum into a sideways climb, or even redirect as much momentum off the wall with a Tap-Strafe, then this becomes very important to you. So ping walls in the fire range and get used to what 20 meter feels like at different angles, and get used to how you can airstrafe into your passive. Being aware of the 0.75 second delay will remove a lot of frustration when learning how to chain a pounce into your passive. That delay is the first of 3 fundamental mechanics I want to drill into your head about a passive. The second is about where you look. Never ever look into the direction of your sideways input. This can delete all of your horizontal climb. Either look straight ahead or in the opposite direction of your sideways input. And the third fundamental is about your forward input. The passive always needs a forward input to initiate in the first place. You can do the semi-wall run on Revenant with just a sideways input, but this is the same as on all other legends and only lasts the duration of a normal climb. You will not engage your Revenant climb passive if you don't hold forward. But when you then are in your climb, you can play around with your forward input a bit. On mouse and keyboard, we cannot vary how much forward we press. You either press it or you don't. But I figured out that you can let go of your forward input for very brief moments throughout the climb. This only works if you look into the opposite direction of your sideways input. If you look straight ahead, you will often fall off. Without the forward pauses, I hit the ceiling here and drop off. With the forward pauses, I transition into the pure sideways climb much faster, letting me get way further, all the way to this back wall. On controller, as long as you still have a sliver of forward component left and don't point your stick directly sideways, you will stay in the climb. This lets you transition into the sideways climb much quicker than on mouse and keyboard. But be aware that this does not give you the maximum sideways range. See how I drop off way before I reach the back wall. Even on controller, your maximum sideways range comes from a 45-degree sideways forwards push. So play around with brief sideways redirections instead until you reach your desired height, but use a 45-degree hold as your main input. There are currently 3 ways to fall off and reattach. The first one is that briefly after starting your climb, you can spam jumps to sort of stay in place. Sometimes you even gain a little height with this and can go sideways. That stops working after a few hops, and you cannot jump off and reconnect if you climb for too long. It only works briefly after you started the climb. The second way is that initiating a climb sets a reattach floor at the height where you initiated the climb. You usually just don't notice this, because the ground you drop towards is at the same height where you initiated the climb and set the reattach floor. If I start my climb down here and then fall off, I will fall all the way back down to the ground. But if I start my climb up here and then fall off, I will only fall to the reattach floor, which is now way above the ground, because I initiated my climb from higher up. This becomes really dramatic if you pounce high to a wall. Now I will pretty much always reattach, because the reattach floor is so high up. This resets as soon as you touch the ground. Of course, this is very useful to know in regular situations. Whenever you jump off, be aware that your first climb interaction will set your reattach floor. So if you need to climb again mid-fall further down below, or do some other wacky shit with reattaches, you now can. Craziest thing this leads to is the possibility to chain the momentum of a pounce into extremely long sideways climbs by jumping off and reattaching repeatedly. These are some extreme examples and will rarely happen in an actual game. But being aware that you can pounce into a climb and chain 2 or 3 jumps and reattaches is really nice. The third way to reattach is around corners. If you leave a wall at a vertical edge, your reattach floor gets set to where you left the wall. This works around corners, but you can even airstrafe back to the same wall you just left. But you actually have to separate from the wall by going over the vertical edge. Climbing rounded corners or jumping off before you reach the vertical edge will not set a new reattach floor. And be aware that reattaching to the wall then also resets your reattach floor. You will rarely ever do this much on a single wall or corner, but it helps to demonstrate what's happening. It's a constant shift of the reattach floor between reattaching to the wall and leaving the wall at a vertical edge. A little tip: the faster you climb sideways, the further you will get flung away from the corner. So experiment around with briefly slowing down as you approach the edge, and using lurches to redirect yourself around the corner. Watch Guapee's Wallrun guide for more on this. A little quirk I wanted to point out about the passive: sometimes I just got stuck on the wall when jumping off. We found a sort of infinite stuck climb a while ago, but it needed a corner of some kind. This one just works on flat walls. Probably nothing you can reliably recreate though, just weird. Onto his ultimate. You can grapple it with Pathfinder. You seem to gain the most distance if you grapple Revenant while he's a good chunk above you. Do with this what you want. Here is a video where I came up with my own movement legend, which uses the removed punch boost movement tech.